She was smiling when she told me how I would die. It started when my cousin, Tunde, and I took a trip to visit our grandparents' village in northern Nigeria. It was a remote, quiet place, too quiet. The villagers barely spoke above whispers, and no one stayed out after dark. When we asked why, the old men just said, "Don't anger the princess." I thought it was some local superstition, something to scare kids. I laughed about it. Tunde did too, but uneasily. The princess wasn't an actual princess. She'd been dead for years. According to the villagers, her name was a bike. She was the daughter of a powerful chief, infamous for her cruelty. They said she used to punish anyone who crossed her, servants, rivals, even her own family. People whispered she had powers, that she could curse someone just by looking at them. After her father died, she ruled with such fear that her own people plotted against her. One night, they trapped her in her palace and set it on fire. But the story didn't end there. The villagers swore her spirit survived, restless and vengeful. Her ashes were buried under a sacred baobab tree on the edge of the village, and no one dared go near it. That night, I dared. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the way everyone seemed so scared. It made me want to prove them wrong. I told Tunde I was going to the tree. He begged me not to go. I laughed it off and went anyway. The air was colder near the tree. It didn't make sense. It was the middle of the dry season, hot and sticky everywhere else. The baobab tree loomed huge and dark against the moonlight. Its bark was scarred, as if something had clawed at it. I could feel my skin crawl, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Then I saw her. She stepped out from behind the tree, dressed in a tattered white gown. Her face was beautiful but wrong. Her eyes were too wide, her smile too sharp. She looked at me like she already knew me, like she'd been waiting. Then I saw her. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice soft but hollow, like it came from far away. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My legs felt like they'd turned to stone. She walked closer, and I realized her feet weren't touching the ground. She tilted her head, studying me, and her smile grew wider. "You think you're brave," she whispered. "Let's see how brave you are when it's your turn." She reached out her hand, but I couldn't tell if she was going to touch me or strangle me. I stumbled backward and ran. I didn't stop running until I was back at my grandparents' house. "You think you're brave," she whispered. "Let's see how brave you are when it's your turn." I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen, not even Tunde. But something was wrong. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept hearing her voice in my head, repeating the same words over and over. "It's your turn." 2 days later, Tunde fell sick. At first, it was just a fever. Then he started screaming at night, saying he saw her standing at the foot of his bed. By the third day, he couldn't speak. He just stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, mouth moving like he was trying to say something but couldn't. The villagers said it was the princess's curse. They begged me to confess what I'd done, to apologize at her tree. I refused. It didn't make sense. How could something like this be real? Tunde died the next day. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what happened. Maybe it really was just a coincidence, or maybe it was her. But I can't shake the feeling that she's still watching, still waiting. And I swear, sometimes at night, I hear her voice again. "It's your turn." The day Tunde died, the village went silent. No one came to the house, not even to offer condolences. It felt like the entire world had turned its back on me. But it didn't matter, because I couldn't think about anything else besides what I had seen at the tree, and the voice that haunted me. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let the princess take me next. I didn't believe in ghosts before, but now I had no choice. If she was real, there had to be a way to stop her. I waited until everyone in the house was asleep and slipped outside. The air was heavy, and the moon was barely a sliver in the sky. The baobab tree felt closer than it should have, like it had crept toward the village. My stomach churned as I approached it, but I forced myself to keep walking. When I reached the tree, I didn't see her. For a moment, I thought maybe it was all in my head, until I felt it. The air around me dropped to a freezing cold, and I could hear faint whispers. They weren't coming from the tree. They were inside my head, like 100 voices were speaking at once. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. "I knew you'd come back," her voice said, clear as day. I spun around, and there she was, standing just a few feet away. Her gown seemed to flow like smoke, and her smile was sharper than ever. Her eyes burned into mine, and I felt like I was sinking into the ground. "I knew you'd come back," her voice said, clear as day. "You thought you could run from me?" she asked, tilting her head. "You didn't even apologize." "Bold. I'm sorry," I stammered. My voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to." She cut me off with a laugh. It was soft but cruel, like she was mocking me. "Sorry," she echoed. "Do you think that will save you?" I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. Her eyes narrowed, and suddenly, the whispers in my head turned into screams. I clutched my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was coming from inside me, louder and louder until I thought my head would explode. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. When I looked up, she was gone. The air was warm again, and the whispers had faded. I turned to run back to the house, but something grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw a root from the tree wrapped around my leg, pulling me toward the ground. I screamed and yanked my foot free, stumbling as I ran. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. By the time I got back to the house, my hands were shaking and I could barely stand. I locked the door behind me and collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. But it wasn't over. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The next morning, I woke up to find strange marks on my ankle, like claw marks, but too deep to be from an animal. I tried to hide them, but my grandmother saw. Her face went pale, and she pulled me aside. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. "You went to the tree," she said. "It wasn't a question. She's marked you." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I didn't even try to deny it. "There's only one way to stop her," she said. "You have to go back and give her what she wants." "What does she want?" I asked, my voice trembling. My grandmother hesitated. "She wants your blood." "There's only one way to stop her," she said. "You have to go back and give her what she wants." I felt like I was going to throw up. "What do you mean? I'm supposed to let her kill me?" "No," she said quickly. "Not all of it. Just enough to satisfy her. You'll have to make an offering. At the tree." I didn't want to believe her, but I didn't see any other choice. That night, I went back to the tree with a knife. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The whispers started again as soon as I got close, but this time, I didn't run. "I'm here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I brought what you want." The whispers stopped, and the air grew colder. She appeared again, her smile wider than ever. "Smart girl," she said, "but it's too late for that." Before I could react, she lunged at me. I swung the knife wildly, slashing at the air, but it didn't stop her. She was on me in seconds, her hands cold as ice wrapping around my throat. I couldn't breathe, my vision blurred, and I thought I was going to die. But then the knife slipped from my hand and cut my arm. Blood splattered onto the ground, and she froze. Her eyes darted to the blood, and for the first time, she looked almost afraid. "No," she whispered. "You're not supposed to." She let go of me and stepped back, her form flickering like a broken light. The ground beneath the tree began to shake, and a deep, guttural sound echoed through the air. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I ran. When I got back to the house, my arm was still bleeding, but the claw marks on my ankle were gone. The whispers stopped, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. I don't know if she's gone for good, but I haven't seen her since. The villagers say the tree split in two that night, and no one dares go near it anymore. As for me, I've learned my lesson. Some stories aren't meant to be tested. I left the village a week after Tunde's funeral, but the curse didn't leave me. At first, I thought I'd escaped. Back in the city, I threw myself into work and avoided thinking about what had happened. The whispers were gone, the claw marks healed, and the nightmares were manageable. But the guilt of Tunde's death lingered, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Then the sign started. It began with my reflection. One morning, as I was brushing my teeth, I glanced up and froze. My reflection was smiling, but I wasn't. The face in the mirror was mine, but the smile wasn't. It was too sharp, too wide, too familiar. I stumbled backward, but when I looked again, everything was normal. I tried to convince myself it was stress, maybe lack of sleep, but deep down, I knew she wasn't done with me. The second sign came a few days later. I was sitting in traffic, staring at the road view mirror, when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, her white gown filthy and torn, her eyes locked onto mine. I whipped around to look, but there was no one there. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow felt like her, every creak in my apartment like her voice whispering my name. It's your turn. I couldn't take it anymore. I called my grandmother, hoping for reassurance, for something to hold on to. Instead, her voice trembled with fear. It's your turn. You should have stayed in the village, she said. The tree's curse doesn't stop at the borders. Then what do? I snapped, desperation dripping from my voice. She's still here. I see her. I hear her. It's your turn. You should have stayed in the village, she said. The tree's curse doesn't stop at the borders. There was silence on the other end before she whispered, You can't fight her. You can only run. Run? Where? How far? I slammed the phone down, furious and terrified. But that night, I understood what she meant. It's your turn. You should have stayed in the village, she said. The tree's curse doesn't stop at the borders. There was silence on the other end before she whispered, You can't fight her. You can only run. I woke up at 3:33 a.m. to the sound of humming. It was soft, almost melodic, but it sent chills down my spine. My bedroom door, which I had locked, was wide open. It's your turn. You should have stayed in the village, she said. The tree's curse doesn't stop at the borders. There was silence on the other end before she whispered, You can't fight her. You can only run. And there she was, standing at the foot of my bed. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a blank, hollow expression. She tilted her head, her wide eyes unblinking. It's your turn. You've kept me waiting, she said. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't move, like invisible hands were pinning me down. She floated closer, her feet just inches above the floor. I could feel the cold radiating from her as she leaned in, her face inches from mine. You've kept me waiting, she said. You should have left me alone, she whispered. But now, you owe me. Her hand pressed against my chest, and it felt like I was burning into my skin. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I saw flashes of something, her life. I saw villagers dragging her from her palace, her screams echoing as they threw her into the fire. I felt her rage, her pain, her hunger for revenge. And then I saw something worse. I saw myself on fire, screaming, just like her. I woke up on the floor, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. My chest ached, and when I pulled up my shirt, there was a hand-shaped burn where she had touched me. I knew then that she wasn't just tormenting me. She was planning something. The next few days were a blur. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't leave my apartment. She was everywhere. In the corner of my eye, in the reflections of windows, in the static of my TV. And every time, she whispered the same thing. It's your turn. I finally broke down and returned to the village. I thought maybe the elders could help, that there was some ritual, some prayer that could end this. But when I arrived, the village was empty. Doors were bolted, windows shuttered, and not a soul in sight. I found my grandmother's house, but she was gone too. On the floor was a single note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. The debt must be paid. Desperation drove me back to the tree, or what was left of it. The debt must be paid. The baobab was split down the middle. Its charred remains barely standing. The air around it was thick and suffocating, and the ground was littered with bones. Human bones. I gagged, but I couldn't turn away. I knew she was there, waiting. You came back, her voice echoed, though I couldn't see her. Good. You'll make it easier. What do you want from me? I screamed, tears streaming down my face. I said I was sorry. I gave you what you wanted. You came back, her voice echoed, though I couldn't see her. Good. You'll make it easier. What do you want from me? I screamed, tears streaming down my face. I said I was sorry. I gave you what you wanted. You came back, her voice echoed, though I couldn't see her. Good. You'll make it easier. What do you want from me? I screamed, tears streaming down my face. I said I was sorry. I gave you what you wanted. You came back, her voice echoed, though I couldn't see her. Good. You'll make it easier. She raised her hand, and the ground beneath me cracked open. Roots shot up, wrapping around my legs, my arms dragging me down. I clawed at the dirt, screaming, but it was no use. You came back, her voice echoed, though I couldn't see her. Good. You'll make it easier. She leaned over me, her smile returning. Now, she whispered, it's your turn to burn. They found my car abandoned at the edge of the village, the doors wide open. Inside was a single handprint burned into the driver's seat. No one ever saw me again, but the villagers say the tree grew back, taller, darker, and more twisted than before. Some say they hear screams at night, echoing from the branches. Others say the princess has a new servant now, wandering the earth, looking for her next victim. And if you're reading this, maybe it's you. That night, I didn't sleep. My resolve was shaky, but fear had turned into anger. Tunde didn't deserve to die, and I wasn't going to let the princess take me too. If she was real, there had to be a way to stop her. I spent hours piecing together the fragments of what I'd heard from the villagers and my grandmother. The princess wasn't just a ghost. She was tethered to the baobab tree where her ashes were buried. That tree was a source of her power, her curse, her hatred. If I could destroy it, maybe I could end her for good. The next day, I armed myself with everything I could find: a machete, a bottle of kerosene, and a lighter. My grandmother's warnings echoed in my mind as I stood at the edge of the village, staring at the distant, twisted shape of the baobab tree. It loomed like a shadow over the land, its branches curling unnaturally, almost alive. You can't fight her, she had said. Her power is older than this village, but I wasn't going to run, not anymore. As I approached the tree, the air grew colder. The ground beneath me felt soft, like it wanted to swallow me whole. The whisper started again, faint at first, then louder, overlapping voices clawing at my mind. You shouldn't have come back, her voice hissed, echoing through the trees. I ignored it and kept moving. The kerosene sloshed in the bottle as I climbed over the gnarled roots. My hands shook as I unscrewed the cap and began pouring the liquid onto the base of the tree. You shouldn't have come back, her voice hissed, echoing through the trees. The air around me grew heavier, the whispers turning into screams. "Stop!" she shrieked. She appeared before me, emerging from the mist like a nightmare brought to life. Her gown flowed like smoke, her eyes burned like coals, and her smile was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. "You think you can end me? Stop!" she shrieked. She snarled, "I am this land. I am its ruler. You are nothing." She lunged at me, faster than I could react. Her icy hands wrapped around my throat, lifting me off the ground. My vision blurred, and the screams in my head grew deafening. I thought I was going to die. "Stop!" she shrieked. She appeared before me, emerging from the mist like a nightmare brought to life. Her gown flowed like smoke, her eyes burned like coals, and her smile was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. "You think you can end me?" she snarled. "I am this land. I am its ruler. You are nothing." She appeared before me, emerging from the mist like a nightmare brought to life. Her gown flowed like smoke, her eyes burned like coals, and her smile was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. She lunged at me, faster than I could react. Her icy hands wrapped around my throat, lifting me off the ground. My vision blurred, and the screams in my head grew deafening. I thought I was going to die. She appeared before me, emerging from the mist like a nightmare brought to life. Her gown flowed like smoke, her eyes burned like coals, and her smile was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. But then I remembered the lighter. With the last ounce of strength I had, I pulled it from my pocket, flicked it open, and dropped it onto the kerosene-soaked roots. Flames roared to life, bright and violent, engulfing the base of the tree. The princess screamed, a sound so terrible it made my skin crawl. She appeared before me, emerging from the mist like a nightmare brought to life. Her gown flowed like smoke, her eyes burned like coals, and her smile was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. But then I remembered the lighter. Her grip loosened, and I fell to the ground, gasping for air. The flames climbed higher, devouring the twisted branches. The tree groaned, its bark splitting open like a wound. The princess writhed in agony, her form flickering like a dying light. "No!" she screamed. "This is my kingdom. You will pay for this." She reached for me one last time, but her hand disintegrated into ash. The fire consumed her, pulling her back into the tree as it collapsed in on itself. The ground shook, and a deafening roar filled the air as the baobab tree was reduced to nothing but smoldering embers. But then I remembered the lighter. Her grip loosened, and I fell to the ground, gasping for air. The flames climbed higher, devouring the twisted branches. The tree groaned, its bark splitting open like a wound. The princess writhed in agony, her form flickering like a dying light. "No!" she screamed. "This is my kingdom. You will pay for this." When the smoke cleared, the air was warm again. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the village for decades had lifted. I stumbled back to the village, blooded and exhausted, but alive. The villagers knew something had changed before I even returned. They stepped out of their homes, eyes wide with disbelief as they looked toward the horizon where the cursed tree once stood. For the first time in years, they spoke above whispers. Children laughed, and the air was filled with a strange, unfamiliar sound. Hope. My grandmother wept when she saw me. "It's over," she said, clutching my face. "The curse is broken." In the days that followed, the land began to heal. The crops grew again, the animals returned, and the village felt alive for the first time in generations. The baobab tree, once a symbol of terror, was gone, and with it, the wicked princess. But not everything could be undone. Toonday was still gone, and the scars of the princess's reign would linger in the memories of the people. As for me, I left the village soon after. I couldn't stay, not after everything I had seen, everything I had lost. I tell this story now as a warning. The princess may be gone, but her legacy remains. They say the land where the baobab tree stood is cursed, that nothing will grow there, and no one dares to build on it. Sometimes, travelers passing through the village claim to hear whispers at night, faint and fleeting, like the echoes of a forgotten queen. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the air feels too heavy, where the trees seem to watch you, and the villagers speak in hushed tones, leave. Because some curses are never truly broken.